Welcome to You're On in 5, The Art of Understudying.
The only podcast to celebrate the work of actors in understudy roles.
Understudying demands tons of preparation with minimal rehearsal.
Or sometimes none at all.
But it can end in triumphant glory.
In these conversations, we'll amplify the diverse voices of actors who have understudied. We want to hear about the artist's technique, experience, and journey.
As well as whatever's on our mind that day. Hi, I'm Scott Sava, and welcome to You're On in 5, The Art of Understudying. You might know me from recent improv jams at I.O. and the Annoyance Theater.
And I'm Elana Elise, your co-host, and you might know me from your dreams.
Ooh.
Today, joining us, we have Tania Richard, and you may know her from
Tania's Take, her own podcast, available on iTunes and Spotify, presumably.
Yes.
Welcome,
Should I continue?
Tania. Yes, please.
Oh, okay. You may know me from your nightmares. Ha ha!
Oh, shoot. There it is. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
We always start with the same question, which is, what was your first understudy gig?
My first understudy gig was Steppenwolf Theater, actually, the Song of Jacob Zulu. And I was in the show, and then ensemble members covered other ensemble members. So I was understudy for the love interest and, I don't know, this character who spoke in Dutch.
Oh, do you
And
speak Dutch?
I sure don't. I sure don't. But I do still remember some of the lines. Me man ek het a goed smeakte, me bien hoekje.
Look
With
at
a Haitian
you.
accent,
Yep.
by the way, because I'm... If I don't practice, any accent I do sounds Haitian. But if I practice, then it sounds otherwise.
Oh, bless your heart. But I sound like I shouldn't be doing accents, so...
In college, I was in My Fair Lady? Something like that. No, what's the one that's... Oh, Pygmalion. And I was playing, like, I don't know, the, like, housekeeper type character. And what I thought I was doing was a British accent. What people told me who saw it were like, oh, I thought it was so cool that you like made her from the Caribbean. I was like, yeah, wasn't that a great choice I made?
I love that. I know a person who every accent sounds like they have a speech impediment. I don't know if they know that.
I know. You know who I think has that issue, God bless her, is Nicole Kidman.
You know what? You're not wrong.
I'm just saying.
You're not wrong.
And none of us are saying there's anything wrong with having a speech impediment. That is not what we're saying.
Nope.
But
Right.
I've thought that about her anyway.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I was just going to say, tell us a little bit about that, because that's interesting that, you know, being in the show and understudying was your first time. So how did you navigate, like, you know, having a principal role as well as understudying, with that being your first time doing that?
Well, I didn't have a principal role. I had an ensemble role.
Oh, that is what
And
you're saying.
so it kind of didn't feel like it just felt like more ensemble characters I was playing, I guess,
I
because
see.
other than the lead, it felt like we were all playing multiple roles. And so the roles I did play were kind of smaller and peppered throughout. And then when it came to understudying, it was just like adding a couple more roles.
That makes sense.
Which weren't that big either. So they had like importance in terms of their relationship to the lead, but they weren't like a full traditional like principal role that you would think of.
Got you. Did you ever have to do those roles, the understudy stuff?
I did, yeah. Well, for Jacob Zulu, I did not. I never had to do that. Soon after that, I did another show with the same theater, same director, some of the same ensemble, and I actually went on quite a bit.
Oh, okay. What show was that?
So that was Nomatemba, and we did it here in Chicago, and then we did it actually at the Kennedy Center. And I was the understudy for both runs of the show. But the second time when we were in Washington, actually, Bernadette Clark was the role I was had the role I was understudying, and she was flying back and forth from Washington to Chicago to film Love Jones.
Ah.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, isn't that wild? And she's got like
Yes.
she's one of the friends in Love Jones. So
Yeah.
she was going back and forth. So I actually got to go on quite a bit, and then had the opportunity to like invite family who lived in Washington because I knew when I'd be going on.
Oh, that's fun.
hmm
Love that.
Going back to the Jacob Zulu show, were there any kind of like, I mean, well, you mentioned the Dutch. Were there any other kind of challenges? Like, was it a very physical show, or like, did the ensemble tracks ever like converge in a way that made it difficult to?
Um,
Yeah.
Not so much difficult, but the one of the things was that we had to do South African accents, so I had to learn that. The
Mhm.
other, excuse me, amazing thing was Song of Jacob Zulu had Ladysmith Black Mambazo in it, who is the South African a cappella singing group who was made famous on this in this country on Paul Simon's Graceland album. So
Yes.
they sort of served as a Greek chorus for this particular show, and we got to sing with them. And so I learned how to do choral a cappella singing led by Joseph Shabalala, who is like an angel, who was an angel on earth, and got to sing with them. So that was just uh, a gift, but also I wouldn't say it was a challenge, but it was just a fascinating way to learn music because there was no sheet music, there was no what do you call it? Like anything to even read, and they were
Mm.
speaking in another language, but we would just sit in a circle and sing over and over and over. Um, and eventually learn the song, and it would just sort of become a part of you. I mean, I'm mixing the two shows up a little bit because in Song of Jacob Zulu we sang less. No Matemba we sang much more. But even with Jacob Zulu, he would lead warm-ups. We'd sing in the jungle and do all sorts of harmonies. And I mean, it was just like a ridiculous first professional experience.
Yeah.
But the understudy aspect kind of felt seamless because I was already in the ensemble. So,
Mhm.
but it was pretty amazing. But not really like that whole experience was such a dream. It really was.
Sounds awesome. um, what was so how many understudy roles have you done in your career?
Quite a bit. I was kind of like the ensemble slash understudy for, I feel like every show I did in the beginning of my career, I was usually cast as an ensemble member and an understudy.
Mhm.
And I also had a run of shows that I did at Steppenwolf. So it happened again with Every Man, directed by Frank Galati. And I was understudying Sherilyn Bruce, who was kind of like the godlike. Well, no, she was like the, I don't know. She guided every man throughout the story. That was a pretty significant role, and that was one of those situations where I was cast knowing I would be going into the role at the end of the run. So I did that. I can't necessarily, I did at Second City where I worked for years. You are cast initially as an understudy. So there's sort of like a track more or less at Second City, or it was back then, where you are brought in and you're sort of on the bench as an understudy covering for touring companies or the stages. And then you get moved into a touring company and you continue to understudy. And then you, if you're lucky, you get to perform on one of the stages. So uh, that one, I would jump into various ensembles. And then I had a huge break at Second City where I wasn't there for a few years. Then I ended up coming back and understudying for a number of the resident stages. So I've done it really sort of felt for a while, and depending on the theater I was at, like an extension of what I was doing, especially at Second City, there's kind of a bit of a blurred line. I mean, obviously, if you're in a cast, you are part of that ensemble, but at any time somebody would have something and you would step in, immediately have to blend in with the cast and that sort of improvisational spirit. And so I should have counted beforehand. I didn't, but I do feel like understudying has been side by side with me, and less so that the more traditional kind where you are not in the show and you are strictly understudying, although I've had that too.
Yeah. I want to ask you, Tanya, do you approach anything differently when you don't know you have guaranteed performances compared to when you know? Is there anything different about how you approach the understudy work?
There's nothing different, but I do think that it's funny when you are understudying for a role that you aren't, that you aren't in the show for. There's just a different speed that you're at. Like, you get to the theater, you hang out in the green room, you've reviewed your lines, but there's like a level of just like mindset that's different. Like, I think it would be incredibly stressful as an understudy if you went to the theater every day sort of like ready to launch. I also think it would be kind of creepy for the cast if you're like, jonesing, ready to go on. So you're really in a major downshift mode. And I can say, actually, as an understudy in that dynamic, I've actually never ended up going on.
Really?
So I've never been like hanging out in the green room and had them come in and be like, you're on in 5. And sometimes I'm still kind of dazzled by it because it's really such a high stakes, scary situation, And no matter how much you've reviewed it, there's got to be that moment, of like, holy crap, am I going to remember everything, right?
Yeah.
But I think probably when I knew I was going in, I probably just started the process earlier.
Yeah.
In terms of learning and memorizing and stuff.
That makes sense. It's interesting because Steppenwolf was your first. And how long had you been acting at that point?
It was my first professional gig.
So you were in the ensemble and you understudied. And
yeah.
Did you do academia? Do you have like degrees in performance
yes.
and stuff? So what I'm trying to like crawl my way to is the way we're talking about it right now is like super matter of fact, right? But they don't really teach you like understudy stuff in school. And so I'm curious if you can kind of rewind back and remember like what it felt like to have to do that, right? Like looking back, like you did it, you've done it a bunch and it's like easy breezy, but there was that first time, and now you're at this very popular, reputable theater and you're on and you're understudying, right? Like what was that like for first timing,
I think I didn't realize it. It also didn't occur to me. Boy, ignorance is bliss. I mean, I was like 22 and I just didn't think about it. It never even occurred to me that I would actually go on.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I just, I was so focused on being in the show And also, probably again, because these smaller roles, it's almost like you could have picked them up just by watching. So that would have been a situation, most definitely, that if I had been like suddenly called to go on, maybe earlier than understudy rehearsal had started, it wouldn't have been that difficult, right? Because I was around it every day. They were smaller roles. So it never felt that insurmountable or out of reach.
Yeah.
And I think it really does have to do with you're around it every day. And I was just, the gift partly of that experience was I just felt so comfortable, and I felt so much like I belonged, that it just felt like, oh, I can step into this. I'm part of the ensemble. It's just like adjusting,
Yeah, no, I love that. And I don't even think that I mean, not that you were suggesting there was something wrong with it, but like the idea of not even thinking about it, I think it's the best way to go through it, because like there's because there's that potential for imposter syndrome or whatever, like be feeling overwhelmed or or even inferior, and so not thinking about it left no room for any of that. It's like, this is your job and now you got to do it. And I love that.
Yeah. I mean, partly too, it was like the particular role. So that at one point we played a group of school children. And then the woman I understudied also was the love interest of the main character. So I was already in the scene that she was in. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So it wasn't even like about watching the scene, because I was already in it. So it literally felt like, oh, well, then I'll just move over to this part. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Totally.
Oh, I won't sit here. I'll sit here. That type of thing.
Yeah.
Tania, I noticed in your bio or somewhere that you went to Illinois State University.
I
did too.
What? So you know the Steppenwolf lore.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It was because you were in the theater department.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Did you take the animals class?
The animals class.
Oh my
Who would have
gosh.
taught that?
Jean Scharfenberg.
Oh, okay. She was out before I got there.
Yes, I am an old woman, so we were not there at the same time. But anyways, animals class was this amazing class where for an entire semester you choose an animal and you become that animal, essentially. And like the whole class, all you're doing is crawling around the floor as the animal. And then there's this big final where you have to kill one of your own. And like the class votes whether it was convincing. And it's truly actually one of the best acting classes I've ever taken, as bananas as it sounds.
I hear about that class from other places, usually outside of the United States. But actors do love it. Yeah. I mean, I didn't study theater in school, and I don't know what the Steppenwolf lore is in relation to that school, but that's cool. I'm glad you guys can bond.
I mean, just to like Cliff's notes it, they all went to ISU and they came to Chicago and they started Steppenwolf.
That's what they did. And we heard about it. And now because I'm older, they may not have there may not have been as much folk, lore around them. But when I was there, it was just like, first of all, that was the track. Your goal was not actually even to have a career, it was to get to Steppenwolf. It's like, that's what it felt like, right?
Yeah.
And it was the like one of the main veteran acting teachers like critiquing John Malkovich's performance in Liaison Dangereuse, and you being like, oh my goodness, she taught him and she's saying he was bad. Like it was so silly.
That's so funny. I went to see a play last week, and I was sitting in the seat that was behind Gary Sinise's seat, like the little label. Their chairs are named, but so I was right. Yes. So I stood up and I was like, oh, well. Then not to mention, I once sat behind the actual Gary Sinise at a play out in North Light some years ago.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
Funny.
All right, so you have this amazing, easy track of understudying.
Yes, it was obnoxiously. Well, yes. I mean, the fact that was my first professional gig, I admit, was obnoxious. Yeah. And, what you gonna do.
What you gonna do? So what was your most recent understudy experience?
My most recent, I believe, was Our Wilderness at Goodman. But the cool thing that the Goodman does actually is they give the understudies performance for the casting directors. So they set aside a day where you actually run the show for them as best you can, and if people are doubled up or whatever. And, it's an opportunity to run the role. So I got to play the role, but just not in front of an audience.
Right.
That's what is we talked about that on a previous episode, because many theaters do that or guarantee performances or whatever. What does that feel like to you, especially as a person mature in career? Right? Like, is it just like another performance? And I guess for me, and this is what I said at the time, like it registers to me as like a showcase, which in general, we don't associate with where we are in real, like us, literally, so
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I'm just curious if it feels any kind of way.
I feel like, it's definitely, it's always a showcase, right? Like, regardless of how long you've been doing it or who's watching. I do really just look at it as like an opportunity to run the role, because when you're rehearsing it, it's so catch as catch can. And you don't ever really, maybe you do a run through, I guess you do, but it doesn't always work that way, the way the schedules are put out. So, I just think of it as like a fun opportunity to run the show. It does have a little bit of stress around it, just because like you don't want to majorly mess up in front of the casting office just for your damn ego. But really I usually I got to do it for Disgraced, which was a show where the number of understudies was the exact, because it was a small cast, was the same number of casts. So we literally just got to run the show that afternoon.
Nice. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
And you too, Scott, and either of your experiences, what have you done for the producers, the understudies producers run when somebody's understudying more than one role? Like, what's been your experience with that?
It gets kind of cheesy. They kind of like, they sometimes will let the person choose which role they would like to do, and then the stage manager steps in for the other. Or it's, it's just not the same. But they do everything they can to make the person who's doing it feel like they're getting highlighted and getting to show their wares. But it's what's been your experience, Scott?
Yeah, we had a couple understudies who were covering multiple roles in the show that I just did, and they would pretty much run it like choose one track to be like their main track, and then if they could jump, like throw their lines in for their other track, they would, but generally, if not, the stage manager would step in. We definitely had our assistant stage manager. There's in this show is a crazy like science fiction adventure thing, and we had a large puppet called the Marithra. There's two actors, one on either end of it, and then the other actors kind of jump in the middle of it, and I don't know, it's hard to describe. And Alana, you saw it. Am I describing it decently?
Yeah, totally.
Oh, okay, great. So our assistant stage manager would come in, and she would be at the head of the Marithra.
Oh, wow.
And the actor who was more familiar with the role would kind of just steer her in the direction that she had to go.
Right.
And that was really just especially with that big like costume prop stage piece, whatever it is, they really did need to practice getting into it and out of it and all that stuff. So I guess it was kind of dependent on whatever the tricky uh, things that the role required would
Mhm.
kind of determine what role they were focusing on at the time.
I've had, I've seen anyway, the like main cast be asked, like whichever
Mm-hmm.
role that the understudy wanted to perform for the performance, then the other
Oh,
actors would be asked if they would, and this would be a discussion like up on
sure.
the front end,
Mm.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that's
yeah,
like
yeah.
twice and at two different theaters, and so the actors were always willing to perform their role so the understudies could have their run,
Right.
but I've never even thought about that before. I've started to be like anti multiple understudies. I don't know, for myself personally, not as a general practice. Like people can do what they want,
Yeah.
but for myself, I don't think I want to do that ever anymore for the rest of ever.
Oh God.
I don't know.
I'm
Also,
trying to think.
I feel that
Yeah.
way about understudying inside the show too. Like it may be
Oh,
not so
really?
much ensemble, but no, probably. Like I don't, because the last time I was asked to do it, it was ensemble, and I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't know.
Well,
Uh,
now, did you have to do it?
oh no. I mean, I
Oh,
think that.
good.
Well, I think that they might have thought I was gonna do it because they told me, but they didn't. Like I'm almost certain they didn't expect me to say no to that because the conversation didn't end with my first no. But then it did end after my second no but
Right.
I definitely think it was taken for granted that I would do it because I don't think anybody else said no. You know.
I am dazzled as much as I've understudied by folks in on Broadway and such who are standbys, swings, learning multiple tracks in the middle of a show, being told that they're gonna go on the rest of the show. Like that just sounds to me like a nonstop heart palpitation. Like I don't even understand, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but with the being in the show part, the thing I think is the most difficult is you go through that whole rehearsal process in your role. You open the show, there's a day off, and then understudy rehearsals start. And those
Mm-hmm.
are twice a week. And it's just like you live at the theater, you know? So that can be tough.
Yeah, and the other thing, and part of kind of opening the perspective about the job of understudying, is that anything can happen at any point, right? Like, so in
Yeah.
general, we're like, be ready, but be off book the same time as the actors, be ready by previews, but rehearsals won't start till after that. But
Yeah.
we've all known, I imagine I have, so I'm
Yeah.
assuming that people who, got hurt opening day or or even during previews or
Mhm.
whatever, and so we don't often take the time to make sure an understudy is prepared to jump in on that early point. We're banking on being able to get them readier during the run of the show, and it's just a really interesting concept when the whole point is that you don't know when you're gonna need them.
Well, there is a bit of a tide changing, I know, anyways, at the Goodman, where now understudies start rehearsing at the same time as the
Mm-hmm.
principals
Right. Yep.
Really?
because of COVID.
Yeah.
And when there's opportunity, they're off in another room learning because now they're just fully prepared for any time somebody needing to step in. But yes, in the past, and then the tricky thing about it was there was this culture of, and I'm not saying about the Goodman, I'm saying overall, there was this culture of like, yeah, your cast is understudy. You come maybe 3 weeks into rehearsal, start watching. You'll have your first rehearsal after we open. Oh my gosh, somebody fell over, go on, and the understudy saves the day because they happen to be or memorized and know everything they're supposed to do. But if they don't know there's this like unspoken expectation
Mm-hmm.
that you're supposed to be able to just save the day like that without necessarily the infrastructure
Mm.
for that to happen, you know?
Right. And then
Yep.
if you are capable of such, what happens is that you're being asked to understudy more because there's
Yeah.
a particular trust in that, and they saw you come
Mm-hmm.
through with that, and they know that
Yeah.
you're going to be prepared and they can rely on you. And it can sometimes interfere with getting primary roles.
Well, I do think that there definitely has to, and there was a time and a point where I was like, okay, I'm done understudying for a while. I'm and I just need to, you know, say no.
Mhm.
Um, and so there's an ebb and flow to it, because then it flows back and you're like, okay, well, I haven't understudied for a while and I want to be around this certain group of people. And then you like decide, but this time I will, right? But I think, for all the youngins out there, I think it's a great way to learn, to watch, to get in proximity to folks that you want to work with.
Mhm.
But you have to have your own boundary of when like you start to notice, oh, I'm only getting asked to understudy. Um, and kind of decide when you need to put a stop to it and sort of send a different message.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Tanya, when in your career, did you notice that like the understudying gigs got you to a certain point, or got you certain cachet with certain directors or casting directors or anything like that?
No. I mean, that is the ruse, right? Um and the thinking that sometimes goes into making that decision. And
Mhm.
I learned quickly, like, no, when I say I will understudy, I am taking on the role of understudy. I am not, the director doesn't have time to talk to me. There are
True.
directors who won't even look at you if you're the understudy. So you're certainly not getting an opportunity to know them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and also, again, under this guise that it's a way to get closer to a director you want to work with, they don't even see you in any of your process because they're gone. Um,
Mhm.
so it does possibly create like a good energy between you and a casting office because you said yes, and hopefully that means they'll call you in for for other roles. But
Mhm.
and the reason I say that isn't because I fortunately never went in thinking that that's what it was going to be. I was more like, I mean, sometimes I was like, oh, it's an opportunity to be at this theater that I
Mhm.
haven't been at before. But I quickly dispelled any notion that it was a stepping stone in the terms of like what we might traditionally think is a stepping stone, because it's just not set up that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You get to know
Hmm.
the stage manager really well. Stage
Mhm.
managers have power. Stage managers, I know from my experience, will be like, this actor should not be working at this theater anymore, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but I just really feel like um, it's a good way to take care of yourself, to just really understand the assignment and then invest in what it is, not what you would like it to be in the
Mhm.
future. You know what I mean?
I'm
Okay.
so glad that you said that here and
Yeah.
now. I
Yeah.
Yeah.
mean, like really, people are taught that that's part of paying your dues. And hopefully, that whole kind of thing with everything changing about the industry and attitudes, hopefully that's going too. But never heard anyone not say what you just said. And I didn't, treat it that way either.
Yeah.
I haven't understudied a whole lot in my life at all. And compared to, I definitely didn't understudy prior to having primary roles, principal roles. Like understudying came later. So I didn't have
Hmm.
that taught to me as a thing I should do. But so many people do. So I'm really glad that Scott
Yeah.
asked
And
that.
I want to be clear though, and I don't mean that. I mean, it depends on what you think of in terms of like what pay your dues means, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
So in my mind, pay your dues means it's almost like you're paying yourself, right? You're paying yourself opportunities. You're paying yourself um, the opportunity to practice whatever your skill set is. And so, in that sense, it is paying your dues. Now, I think the old way of thinking of what paying your dues is like essentially the structure or the dynamic is you're paying the man in order to get ahead, right? Got to
Mm-hmm.
pay your dues. But so to me, sometimes that can have a negative connotation. So I don't necessarily think it is or isn't paying your dues as much as it is like it's a very deliberate and conscious choice. And each time you make it, just know that the reasons why you're doing it and make sure that they're feeding you in some way versus some imaginary a thing that you actually have no control of,
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great. Even that's great. I'm glad you're saying all the words, Tanya. I'm glad you're here. Like people don't, there's been a general one kind of paying your dues kind of idea. And so inserting that different perspective, I mean, people, are you listening? Because I think that you should be listening to what Tanya is saying because it's golden. Before we take a break, we're going to take a break in a minute, but I just want to ask this, and especially now, given understanding your your attitude towards your craft and understudying, up to this point, has there been anything that you specifically were not willing to understudy?
Yeah. And the reason was because the timing was at a place where I'm like, this is gonna cost me more than I will gain. And I don't mean
Mm.
financial.
Mm-hmm.
So it just strictly meant like, oh, this is not a good time emotionally, personally, financial, personally, for me to be at this place every day with no sense of whether I'll ever get to be on, which again is another reason why not to understudy. Like, don't understudy because you're like, oh, maybe I'll go on. It's just that's really not actually the gig. So
Right.
it's like at that time I was like, that's not how I want to spend my time. And I am in a fortunate position, and this is really important to say. There's privilege that comes with that, right? I have other means of making money. I have a spouse who has insurance. So for me at that time, it wasn't going to be worth the cost of my doing it. But I have something upcoming where it is. So it's just depends on that. So um it had nothing to do with anything like, oh, I'm no longer doing this, or it's not worth my energy. I just didn't have the energy to put towards it. So
Mm-hmm.
I said no.
All these wonderful ways to assess whether one should take a gig. Are
Yeah.
you listening out there, people?
Right. I want to highlight the privilege thing, and in the privilege in the sense of the things I mentioned,
Yeah.
because it's like not everybody can do that,
True.
And then aren't we lucky that, maybe an opportunity like that comes along because you're still in proximity of it. You're still in the world. You're still in the community, So, yeah.
Awesome.
I love it. I think it's time for a break. We'll be right back with more Tania Richard. All right, we are back with Tania Richard, and now it's time for the breakdown. And our question for this week is, have you ever had a stage name?
Oh my God, yes.
Yes?
Yes. I got really excited. Sorry.
It did. It made me excited.
I love it.
So I have gone under Tania Leon,
Mhm.
which is my mother's maiden name is Leon, but it's spelled Leon. So I've gone under Tania Leon. And I've gone under Renee Lawrence as my writing pseudonym, and before I came out as a writer.
That's cool.
Nice.
And really, it was when I would go to auditions, I would perform my own my monologues that I'd written. But I didn't want to like turn them off by being like I performed my own writing, so I would say it was written by Renee Lawrence.
Oh, that's
That's
clever.
awesome.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I love it. And I'm glad that everyone got to hear that as well.
I don't know if it paid off for as excited as I got, but
Well, but you did it. Nobody was like, who's Renee? Who's that?
That's right. And then when I did finally decide to come out as a writer, I put on a show where I cast a bunch of my friends to perform a lot of the monologues that I'd written, and I wrote some original monologues for them, and it was called An Evening with Renee Lawrence. And I revealed that I was indeed Renee Lawrence.
That's awesome. Send me some monologues, Tanya.
Heck yeah. I love doing that. Okay.
I was born Elana Elise Cowan, and then my stage name since I was 7 has been Elana Elise. And it was great too, because when I got married, I'm no longer married. When I got married, like still like it was my performance career was unaffected because I still just had Elana Elise. So
yeah. And then professionally now is Tania Richard, and that's my maiden name. Nice. And my married name is Tanya Gull.
Oh, that's what that is right there on that.
Yes.
Screen.
And it's funny that came up because I just got a wedding shower invitation and it said Mrs. Tanya Gull. And I just stared at it because I've never seen that in writing. I've never seen my whole married name like that. It was kind of a trip.
Yeah, it is. Scott, have you ever had one?
Kind of. I used to include my middle name in my name, so it's Scott Patrick Sava. And I don't know what that was about. I mean,
oh God,
I really like my name, and because I'm Scottish, Irish, and Polish, so like each of the names covers each of those nationalities.
Sure. Sure.
That's fun. And I think with a name that was only like 9 letters combined, I felt small in some weird way. Like maybe if I put Patrick in the middle, it'll show me off a little bit better.
Sure. All the thinking that exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't know, and maybe I thought it made me sound more I don't know, put together or something like that, Scott Patrick Sava.
So why'd you stop using it? Like, what happened that made you say like this is dumb? Because you're acting like you think it was dumb now, and I don't know. It still seems fine to me. Yeah. But like, what made you stop using it?
Yeah, no, I do kind of feel like it was dumb. Let me see. I know I had it on headshots for a while. So I kind of locked into it there for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And then I think I was kind of like rebranding in, I don't know, like after I turned 30 or something, and was just like, you know what, this is a lot of letters, and I can just do with Scott Sava. And the tricky thing about my name is that I have the W in the last name that's pronounced as a V. So yeah, so that's always kind of a like, I feel like if people don't know how to pronounce a name, it doesn't stick in their brains as much. I think that's
but the correction does. So I have a name that nobody on site would know how to pronounce, right? So I get a lot of Tania Richards, Tania Richards, Tania, whatever. Tania. And in particular, my last name. But what I realized it became was a conversation starter. So I have no shame correcting politely that it is Richard. And then it's kind of cute because over the years, as people get to know me and feel like, we have a friendship or whatever, they get very defensive for me, right? So that if it's like someone mispronounces it, people will be like, it's Tania Richard. You know what I mean? And I feel very loved and seen.
I
But
do
yeah,
that
now
for
it's just sort of
people.
like what?
I was just gonna say I do that for people even when I don't know them well.
Yeah.
Like name mispronunciations are like the worst. Like I will not be witness to them. As long as I'm like I will correct like anybody. I had to sit in on a government council meeting once some years ago, and this woman just kept mispronouncing this woman who had an ethnic name that I hadn't like learned how to pronounce, and like on this like conference call, I corrected this woman. And it's because I'm just like because the part of my problem too is like when people are flipping about it. Like,
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
come on, like we have so little in this life, like. Say my name right. And Americans acting like a certain amount of syllables or certain pronunciations are so difficult. You can say supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, then you can say, I don't know, suther. Like
yes. Well,
like,
now, but I give there is the space for the person to be like, how do you pronounce your name? Like, I don't have an issue with that. It's like, and then correcting it and moving on, right? Like, I don't expect anybody to know that Richard is pronounced Richard. But once I tell you,
that's what I'm talking about. Like, of course, like once it's said, and I have people mispronounce my name who've never seen it. I'll say it, and they'll say it wrong back to me.
Yeah.
What just happened?
Like
that's a fancy microaggression. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, like I don't understand what that is, but ultimately
it's a microaggression.
Which is exactly what was going I know, which is why I'm so adamant about it.
Yeah.
I don't tend to get, I'll be like, what? But it's not until like I'll correct you repeatedly in the same tone as the very first time, right? Like, so I'm always gonna, but they themselves start to feel like I'm like yelling my name correctly at them because they know they've been repeatedly messing it up, and it ain't hard. I got 5 letters, 3 syllables, and can you say Lana? Because you can. So if you can say Lana, you can say Elana. No, you can't. It's bananas. I cut you off at some point though. You were saying.
Oh gosh, I don't know what I was saying.
I'm so sensitive about name pronunciation.
Oh, well, yeah, no, I was just saying the thing about how everybody mispronounces my name, and then it's just like it sticks. In fact, the correction actually sticks in people's heads, right? So I don't know. I've just spun it to be a positive thing.
Yeah,
which is not necessarily my nature. So I don't know.
Well, and with Scott, like one of my best friends' names is Sawa, like Frank Sawa. It's pronounced with a W, spelled exactly the same as Sava. Yeah, so like, why do I have to be in the middle of that?
That is why. Why are you asking me to choose? Why?
Exactly.
Yeah, I when I did that rebranding, it popped in my head that if I just use the name Scott Sava, it rhymes with hot lava.
Yes.
And hot lava is almost a phrase unto itself. Like I feel like if you watch volcano documentaries, you've probably heard the phrase hot lava before.
Sure.
So I started putting that in my emails, like in the signature part. I started putting it on my resume at the very bottom. It's everywhere now, and people remember it. And will actually correct other people in the same way.
Right.
And it's just like, it's actually really nice. It like actually means a lot.
I totally agree.
In your next rebranding, will you just call yourself Hot Lava?
Yeah, I think so.
I take issue if something artistic comes my way addressed to Ilana Sullivan, because like they have literally no reason to have Sullivan anywhere in their world.
Right.
And then it makes me that I'm spending too much time wondering why they know that. Right? Because across the board, like across the board, you won't see Sullivan. My website, my Gmail, the emails I use, generally my website email, like there's nowhere. So if you are something related to the performing arts and you use Sullivan, I gotta know where you got that from. What kind of
Mm-hmm.
stalking have you been doing and why? Because you really should only have access to Ilana Elise. And
Right.
if you somehow stumbled upon Sullivan, you still would have seen Ilana Elise way more,
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it troubles me. I
That
find
is
it
a little
troubling.
creepy. I hear you.
Right?
I hear you.
Yeah, the only thing I
Yes.
can think of is that maybe like, because I remember knowing that your last name was Sullivan from a very earlier point, but I think maybe it was because we were rehearsing at your apartment, and maybe your door thing
Probably.
said Sullivan.
And then that's a way to know, as long as you were invited into this area.
Right.
But yeah, and I don't mind people knowing because I didn't know for, I don't know, 15 years in Detroit. I had no idea that people thought my last name was Elise.
Mhm.
So then that was hilarious when I found that out, right? So like I don't mind people knowing it, but if you don't know me and you are in the arts, you shouldn't be using it. Like even it's just weird. But it wasn't
Yeah.
a secret, which is why like even now in my non-theater job, I actually use my full name in my
Oh,
signature.
really?
And then I changed my non-theater Outlook to have my full name. And so it's like, fine, know that I'm Ilana Elise Sullivan. That's lovely. But if you got something
Yeah.
arts related, you only talk to Ilana Elise. Miss Sullivan is not available to you.
She's not you cannot pay her fees.
Is it time for props?
It's time for props.
It's time for props. Right. So during props, we just invite you to give some shout outs, props, if you will, to anybody, stage managers, understudies you've seen perform, and anybody that you think you want to honor in this space.
Oh my goodness. I'm rooting for everybody black.
All right.
Amen.
Let your mind go where it wants to go. I mean, names came to mind, and then I also thought, like, when it comes to amplifying and uplifting, I'm like mainly interested in amplifying and uplifting marginalized folks. So, Lillian Brown, she's a person who does not have a separation between her principal cast and her understudy cast, even saying it that way. I don't think she would ever refer to it that way. It all feels like one ensemble. And I have been in situations where the director, like I mentioned earlier, doesn't look or speak to you. You aren't invited to note sessions. They never extend themselves to you at all. So we'll give a shout out to Lil for creating that fluidity. Let me think what else. What else? I don't know. People that are coming to mind are like Nikki Brooks, who's just a badass and has been badassing left, right, um, and everywhere, and amazing writer, um, and producer, and fierce person. I mean, the fact that any one of us are still doing the thing after what we've all been through. The cast of Schoolgirls, or the African Mean Girls play that I was a part of, first show to come back after the pandemic at the Goodman Theater, and bringing everything we went through during the pandemic, and still putting on a hilarious, joyous production. I think of those women and those that creative spirit and sisterhood. So those are some folks that come to mind.
Yay.
Yeah, I like it.
Scott, are there any props that you have this week?
Oh, hmm.
I don't have anything.
Right.
Yeah,
It's okay. I
think
just
I'm
wanted to
good.
check in
Yeah,
with you.
I appreciate
I
it.
don't know. I have seen, I mean, and speaking of just lifting blackness, like the last 3 shows I've seen have been black, and I have just loved. I've just loved. Like, I'm really
Yeah.
glad that I've been able to. I mean, so if in that vein, I'm going to shout out Jessica Turner, just because like the first two I was able to see because she invited me, and then the last one she was in, and so she's gonna the most recent 3 shows because I don't get out much still yet.
Yeah.
I try, I guess, but it's not always easy, and so they've been due to her, and I've just really enjoyed watching us on stage.
It's a beautiful thing, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Was one of those shows last night and the night before?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I saw that one too. And there was an understudy in for
Oh,
Namir
speaking of.
Smallwood. And he was very good.
Oh,
Nice.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Good.
just saw that. That's the last thing we just saw.
Oh, nice.
Oh yeah.
Sydney Charles is another person, hardest
Mhm.
working woman in Chicago.
Yes, making it happen every damn day.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. We have one more question for you, my dear,
Yes.
and Scott's gonna ask it.
All right. So, Tanya, we like to end each show with just what's some advice that you would give to yourself as you were starting out in the business, or to somebody who's starting out now in the business that you wish somebody had told you before?
You gotta calibrate, figure out your inner compass, and follow what feels good and right to you. And you don't have to do the wrong thing to get ahead. You don't have to, um, step on people's toes or be unkind, as sometimes you are encouraged to do early in your career to get ahead. You don't have to do any of that. And make sure that you are living outside your comfort zone, experiencing things outside of your comfort zone. If you look around a room and you're working with people who all look like you and think like you and talk like you, expand your borders, because this business is about relationships, and it thrives on diversity versus sort of one vision, one way of doing things. But really, in the purest sense, do what feels right and what feels good and doesn't cause you to sort of question your purpose.
I hope everybody out there is listening to this wisdom dropped by Tania Richard. So great. Also, I really enjoy when this podcast offers me things to think about or rethink. Like,
Oh, good.
I'm very grateful to you.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you for
Thanks for
joining us.
having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
We hope you enjoyed our conversation today with Tania Richard, and that it gives deeper insight into the art of understudying.
To send us a question or give a suggestion of someone we should interview, email us at understudypodcast@gmail.com.
Or hit us up at UnderstudyPod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We want to thank all of our Patreon subscribers, especially Marcella Huff and Stanley Sava.
If you want to support the show, head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/understudypod.
Our theme song and all other music are by Laura McKenzie.
Our episodes are edited by me and produced by me and Alana.
Thanks so much for listening. If you liked it, please hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice and tell your friends.
And if for some reason you hated it, tell your enemies.
And their parents.
And their stupid, life messing up parents.
Bye.
Bye.